Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. My name is Luther Barrett. I am 32 years old, and I run a data analytics company called Sky Loom Analytics out of a cramped apartment in Austin, Texas. What bothers me isn't the skepticism itself. It's the certainty behind it, how confidently people dismiss what they've never even tried to understand. People who've never written a single line of code, never built anything from scratch, somehow know exactly why my work will fail. Edmund Caldwell had been explaining my inevitable downfall to anyone who would listen for 3 years running. Tonight, at Thanksgiving dinner, with both our families packed around his polished mahogany dining table, he was doing it again. I had stepped into the kitchen to grab another bottle of wine when I heard his voice carry through the doorway. "Evelyn deserves better than this," he was saying, in that same slow, deliberate tone he always used when he wanted to sound reasonable but condescending. 3 years of watching him play computer games in their living room. I stood there for a second, wine bottle in hand, frozen. The kitchen was warm from the oven. My mother-in-law's voice followed, soft, almost pitying. "He's a sweet boy," she said, "but she could have had someone more stable." I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. My own parents were probably just sitting there, saying nothing. That silence, their silence, was somehow worse than all the insults. It was agreement, wrapped in cowardice. Edmund continued. "The man has no sense of practical responsibility. No steady income. No benefits. No plan for the future. Just this fantasy about making money from software." I walked back into the dining room, keeping my face blank, carefully neutral. I poured wine for everyone who wanted it, Edmund included, and smiled at him like I hadn't heard a word. But something had shifted in my chest. Something cold. Something patient. The truth was, I had signed acquisition papers with Vinex Holdings 2 days earlier. $12 million for Sky Loom Analytics, plus an executive position in their data infrastructure division. The announcement would go public on Monday, 3 days from now. But sitting at Edmund's table, watching him explain why I was destined to fail, I decided some people deserve to learn about success the hard way. Evelyn caught my eye across the table. She knew something was different, but she didn't know what. I hadn't told her about the acquisition yet. Not because I didn't want to, but because I needed everything finalized before I shared the news. I wanted to be absolutely certain before I got her hopes up. Now, though, I had a different reason for keeping quiet. I wanted Edmund to have a few more days of certainty about my worthlessness. I wanted him to go to sleep tonight convinced that he understood exactly what kind of man his daughter had married. The kind who couldn't provide. The kind who had potential but no results. The kind who should have applied for a job with benefits and kept his head down. The rest of dinner passed normally, at least on the surface. Edmund droned on about his real estate investments and his plans to expand the property management business. He was always expanding something: his portfolio, his network, his ego. He mentioned a new condo development he was eyeing, said something about market trends and cap rates. My cousin, sweet guy, but a little slow, asked about my computer hobby. Still messing around with that data stuff? He asked, half laughing, like I'd been playing with Legos. "Yeah," I said, pouring myself half a glass of wine. "Still have a few clients. Building out some tools. Revenue's been growing steadily." Cool, cool, he said. "So what exactly does it do? Like, do you fix computers?" I smiled. "Not exactly. More like helping companies understand patterns in their business data. Sales, customer behavior, that kind of thing." He nodded slowly, clearly unsure what any of that meant. I didn't explain further. Nothing specific enough to sound like bragging. Nothing detailed enough to be impressive. When we left that night, Edmund shook my hand and gave me that same condescending grin he'd perfected over the years. "Well," he said, gripping my shoulder like he was giving advice to a teenager, "best of luck with your little project." His tone was patronizing, but not unkind. He probably thought he was being supportive. I didn't even flinch. Just nodded and thanked him. I met Evelyn 4 years ago at a coffee shop near the University of Texas campus. She was finishing her master's in education, and I was deep in freelance development work while plotting my escape from a corporate software job that was slowly choking the life out of me. We talked about books, technology, what it meant to build something meaningful. She was curious, open-minded, idealistic, but in a way that felt grounded. Evelyn believed in taking risks for the right reasons. Her family, on the other hand, believed in one thing above all else: security. Edmund had built his wealth carefully: real estate, one property at a time. Nothing flashy, nothing that couldn't be easily explained to a banker. He owned a portfolio of rentals across Austin and considered himself the model of responsible success. When Evelyn and I got married 2 years ago, he pulled me aside at the reception, glass of champagne in hand, to talk strategy. "So," he said, What's the long-term plan? I told him the truth. I wanted to build a company that could help small businesses make sense of their data. I wanted to create analytics tools that were powerful but accessible. He nodded, gave me a polite smile, and said, "Have you thought about applying to management positions at some of the big tech firms around here? Might give you more stability while you figure things out." Sky Loom Analytics started in our apartment 6 months after the wedding. The idea was straightforward. Most small businesses collected enormous amounts of data, but had no way to analyze it effectively. Enterprise solutions were too expensive and complicated. Basic tools were too limited. We wanted to build something in between, something powerful enough to deliver real insights, but simple enough for a small team to use without hiring a dedicated IT department. The first year was promising. I landed 3 clients through networking, former colleagues, word-of-mouth referrals. Evelyn was teaching high school then, and I worked nights and weekends, piecing the platform together, brick by digital brick. She graded papers at the kitchen table while I debugged code at my desk 10 feet away. We lived small, cheap groceries, no vacations, but the work felt real. Hours. Edmund would ask about my progress during family dinners, but his questions were always coded with implication. "How's the business coming?" he'd ask, sipping his wine. "You starting to think about backup plans? Just in case." I'd say something like, "We've got a couple strong leads this quarter," and he'd nod, expression blank. Then pivot to talking about how his property in South Lamar was gaining value. The second year was harder. One client canceled their contract budget cuts. Another decided to bring analytics in-house, thought they could do it cheaper. I spent months setting up calls, demos, follow-ups only to hear variations of, "We love what you've built, but we're just not ready to commit to the monthly subscription." Meanwhile, Edmund started bringing up job openings. At first, they were framed as casual tips. "There's an opening at a fintech company I know. Senior data analyst. Great benefits." I could put in a word. Every suggestion felt less like advice and more like a lifeline he thought I should grab before I drowned. But this year had been different. 6 months ago, a mid-sized consulting firm started using our platform for their client reporting. They liked what they saw. It was simple, effective, adaptable. They recommended us to a few of their partners. Word spread. By September, we had 12 active clients and a waiting list. For the first time, the revenue was stable enough to pay both Evelyn and me actual salaries. That was when Vianex Holdings reached out. They'd been watching the small business analytics space. Quietly, apparently. Their team had noticed our client retention, our reviews, our growth. They wanted to acquire Sky Loom Analytics and fold our technology into their enterprise offerings. The first few calls were exploratory, light. Then we started talking numbers. October was a blur of NDAs, term sheets, lawyers. But last Tuesday, I signed the paperwork. $12 million. A 2-year consulting contract. Equity in Vianex's expanded analytics division. Everything I had worked for. Everything Edmund insisted would never happen. But he didn't know. Not yet. The phone call came Monday morning, just after 8. Evelyn had left an hour earlier. The apartment was still and quiet. My coffee had gone cold on the desk beside me. I'd been half-focused, reviewing our client onboarding docs, waiting for the phone to ring. It did. I answered on the first buzz. "Luther," David Chin said. "We're good to go." I sat up straighter. "It's finalized." "All of it," he confirmed. "Legal just signed off." "Congratulations." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "The press release will go out at 9 a.m. Eastern," David added, his voice calm, professional, but with a trace of excitement underneath. "We are excited to announce the acquisition of Sky Loom Analytics and welcome you to the Vianex Holdings family." After I hung up, I just sat there, in my home office, for 20 full minutes, not moving. 3 years of work. 3 years of Edmund's polite skepticism. 3 years of wondering if I was being naive, if I had overestimated myself, overreached, believed in something that would never quite materialize. The validation felt enormous, monumental, but also strangely distant. Like I was watching someone else's success story unfold in slow motion. I stared at my screen, then at the walls, then back at my coffee. Still cold. Still untouched. Eventually, I picked up my phone and called Evelyn. She answered from her classroom. "Hey," I said. "Can you meet me for lunch today?" "I have a planning period at noon," she said. "I can come meet you." "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," I said. I have some news. Wanted to tell you in person." An hour later, we were sitting across from each other in a booth at the diner near our apartment. The same place we used to go when we couldn't afford anything more than pancakes and coffee. The lunch rush hadn't started yet, so it was quiet. A little sunlight spilling through the window. She reached across the table, took my hand. "What's going on?" she asked. I smiled. Our lives just changed completely. Then I told her everything. The acquisition. The contract. The $12 million. The equity. Vianex. I watched her face as I spoke. watched the shift from confusion to realization, and finally to something that looked like overwhelming relief. She started crying. Evelyn never cried, not even during fights, not when she was stressed. But now, she was wiping tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, not bothering to hide it. "I always believed in what you were building," she said, voice trembling. "But I worried sometimes. Not about you, but about the pressure you put on yourself." "I worried too," I said. "Especially after family dinners with your dad." Her expression tightened. Her shoulders tensed a little. "He's been hard on you," she said. "I know that. But he means well, even when he doesn't express it well." I shook my head. "Evelyn, he called me a complete failure." Her eyes widened. 3 days ago, at Thanksgiving, I said. I was in the kitchen getting wine. I heard him telling your mother, your sister, whoever would listen, that my startup would never amount to anything, that you deserved better. She stared at me, stunned. "He said that?" I nodded. He wasn't whispering. He didn't care if I heard. Evelyn looked hurt. Not just on my behalf, but in a deeper, more personal way, like something in her had cracked open. "I had no idea he was saying things like that," she said quietly. "It doesn't matter now," I told her. But we both knew it did matter. "But I want you to understand why I might not be eager to call him with the good news." "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean, maybe we let him find out when everyone else finds out," I said. "When the press release hits the business news and people start calling to congratulate us." I let out a breath. "I don't need to prove anything to your father. But I also don't need to make his reaction easier for him." Evelyn considered this carefully, her thumb running along the edge of her coffee mug. "I understand," she said slowly. "How long do you want to wait?" "Until he calls us," I said. "Let him sit with it." The press release went live at 9 a.m. Eastern on Monday morning. By 10 o'clock, my phone was buzzing nonstop: LinkedIn, Twitter, local business blogs. The headline was simple, direct. Austin-based Sky Loom Analytics acquired by Vianex Holdings for $12 million. I watched the story ripple outward. Social media lit up. Former colleagues shared the article with comments like, "Always knew he'd do something big," or "Proud to have worked with this guy back in the day." Old college friends messaged me. "Is this the Luther Barrett from CS Theory class?" Local tech forums were posting about it, about how our acquisition showed the growing strength of Austin's startup scene. My phone felt like it was on fire. Around mid-morning, Evelyn texted me from school. "My principal just showed me the article online. She wants to know if she can interview you for the school newsletter." By noon, I'd received 43 phone calls, 67 texts, and more LinkedIn connection requests than I could process. Everyone wanted to congratulate me, grab coffee, pitch a partnership. The attention was overwhelming, but it was also gratifying in a way I hadn't expected. Years of effort, doubt, and quiet belief finally had a moment in the light. But one thing was conspicuously absent. Nothing from Edmund Caldwell. I knew he'd seen the news. He was too connected not to. Evelyn's sister Claire had called her during lunch asking, "Is that real? Is Luther really the guy in that article?" Evelyn's mother left a voicemail saying how proud she was, how excited the whole family felt. But Edmund? Silence. Tuesday passed. Nothing. Wednesday afternoon, Evelyn mentioned it casually while she was folding laundry. "Mom asked why Dad hasn't called you yet." I didn't say anything. "She didn't have a good answer," Evelyn added, glancing at me. "But I think we both know what it is." I nodded. We did know. He was struggling. Not with the news. He understood what had happened, what it meant. He was struggling to find the right words. Thursday evening, I was in my home office, responding to emails from prospective clients who had found us through the Vianex announcement, when his name popped up on my phone. Edmund Caldwell. Calling. I watched the screen until it went dark. Let it go to voicemail. An hour later, he called again. I ignored it. He called once more, just before I went to bed. I didn't pick up. Friday morning, he texted. "Luther, I have been trying to reach you. Could we talk when you have a chance?" I showed the message to Evelyn as we sat down for breakfast. She looked at it, then at me. Her face softened, eyes flickering with conflict, understanding where I was coming from, but clearly torn. Torn between her husband and her father. "He's probably embarrassed," Evelyn said, her voice low. "About what he said on Thanksgiving." "Good," I replied, without hesitation. "He should be embarrassed." She gave me a look, not angry, but waited. "He's still my father, Luther. At some point you will need to have a conversation with him." "At some point, yes. But not right now. Not while he's scrambling to figure out how to rewrite the last 3 years of dismissing everything I worked for." Evelyn nodded slowly, but I could see it was bothering her. My refusal to take Edmund's calls was beginning to press against her from both sides. She didn't want to take his side, but I was her husband, and she was being pulled into a quiet, unresolved standoff. She was stuck between supporting me and keeping peace with her family. It was an unfair position for her, and I knew I couldn't let that go on for long. But before any resolution, I wanted Edmund to sit with it. To feel what it was like to be dismissed, ignored by someone whose opinion meant something. For 3 years, he had treated my work like a phase, a hobby. He never asked about our business model, never asked who we were serving or what problems we were solving. He had made up his mind from the beginning. I wasn't the kind of man who built something that succeeded. Now he knew otherwise. And now, it mattered to him. He was reaching out not just to congratulate me, but to salvage something. Because he knew he'd gotten it wrong, and the longer he stayed on the wrong side of it, the more permanent that misjudgment felt. But letting him fix it too quickly would have meant letting go of how deep his dismissal had cut. Some mistakes are meant to be uncomfortable for a while. Then, on Saturday afternoon, around 2 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Evelyn and I were in the middle of going over weekend plans, what errands we needed to run, what groceries we were out of. She walked over and opened the door. I stayed where I was, just out of view. Then I heard his voice. "Hi. I was hoping I could come in and talk with both of you." Evelyn turned to me, her face cautious but calm, a silent question in her eyes. I gave a small nod. Avoiding him forever wasn't a plan, and I preferred to have this conversation on our ground, not his. Edmund stepped in and looked around the apartment. He seemed smaller than I remembered him. Not physically, but in presence his usual certainty replaced by something tentative. He sat on the couch without being asked. His hands rested between his knees, and he stared at them like they held the right words if he could just read them. Then, finally, he spoke. "I owe you both an apology," he said. "Luther, I've been trying to reach you since Monday, and I understand why you haven't returned my calls." His voice was slower than usual, deliberate. No performance, no posture. "I said things about you and your work that were not only wrong," he paused, as if swallowing something dry, but cruel. It was more direct than I'd expected, a better opening than I thought he'd manage. Still, I didn't reply. Not yet. I wanted to hear where he would take it. When I saw the news about the acquisition, Edmund began, still staring at his hands. My first feeling wasn't pride or excitement. It was shame. His voice was low, not dramatic, just worn. Shame that I had been so wrong about what you were building, and shame that I'd been so dismissive of your efforts. He finally looked up first at Evelyn, then at me. "Your mother told me you overheard what I said at Thanksgiving. About you being a failure. About Evelyn deserving better." Those words were unforgivable, and I've been thinking about them all week. They were unforgivable, I said, and let the words hang between us. But they were also honest. "That's really what you thought about me." He winced, like the honesty in my voice cut sharper than anything I'd said before. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's what I thought. I was wrong, obviously, but I was also wrong in a deeper way. I let my own fear about financial security make me cruel to someone my daughter loves." "Your fear?" I asked. I wanted him to say it plainly. "I built my wealth carefully," he said. "Conservative real estate investments, municipal bonds, businesses with predictable cash flow. I understand that world. I know how to evaluate risk in that context. But I don't understand technology. I don't understand startups. So I assumed they were inherently more dangerous than they actually are." It was an interesting answer, a little self-reflective, but it still didn't touch the center of it. "You weren't just skeptical about my business model," I said. My voice was even, but I felt the heat in my chest. "You were dismissive of me. As a person. You talked about Evelyn deserving better, not about Evelyn deserving more financial stability." Edmund nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "I confused my anxiety about your career with my assessment of your character. I decided that someone who made risky professional choices must be irresponsible in other ways too. That was unfair. And stupid." Evelyn, who'd been quiet until then, turned to him. Her voice didn't rise, but there was steel in it. "Dad, I appreciate that you're trying to make amends. But Luther has every right to be angry about this. You spent 3 years treating him like he wasn't good enough for me." "I know," Edmund said, looking down again. "And I know that apologizing now after he's proven me wrong so dramatically probably seems convenient. Like I'm only changing my opinion because of the money." "That's exactly what it seems like," I said. He went silent for a long moment, then looked at me, really looked at me. "What would you need from me," he said carefully, "to believe that my apology is genuine?" It was a fair question, and I gave it the thought it deserved. The truth was, I didn't need Edmund's approval. I didn't even need his respect. His opinion of me had been wrong for 3 years, and I had no illusions that it wouldn't continue to miss the mark in new ways going forward. But what I did need was for him to understand that his dismissal hadn't just been about my business or my professional choices. It had been personal, deeply personal. I looked directly at him. "I would need you to understand," I said carefully, "that you weren't just wrong about Skylum Analytics. You were wrong about me, about who I am, and what I'm capable of." Edmund didn't flinch this time. He held my gaze. I kept going. "And I'd need you to treat Evelyn's judgment with more respect going forward. You weren't just doubting me, you were implying that she made a poor choice in choosing me. He was silent for a long time. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if the words are actually getting through. Finally, he said, "You're absolutely right." He turned slightly to Evelyn, then back to me. "I disrespected both of you. And I did it consistently. For 3 years. I don't have a good excuse for that." His voice didn't crack, but there was something in it that sounded smaller, less sure of itself than I'd ever heard from him before. We sat in the living room and continued the conversation for another hour. It wasn't all emotional unpacking, some of it turned surprisingly practical. Edmund started asking actual questions. Not the condescending kind disguised as interest, but real questions. He wanted to know how I built Skylum Analytics. He asked about the architecture behind our data processing, how we handled client-side customization, what Vianex had seen in our platform that differentiated it from other tools. I answered, cautiously at first, then more freely as I realized he was listening, actually listening for the first time since I'd known him. "I realize now," he said slowly at one point, "that I never really tried to understand what you were building. I made assumptions based on my own limitations, not on what you were actually accomplishing." It was probably the closest thing to a real apology I was ever going to get from Edmund Caldwell. He wasn't the type to break down or gush. But this admission, it meant something. When he left that afternoon, Evelyn and I sat on the couch and talked. The immediate tension was gone, but we both knew this wasn't over. There was still a long way to go. "He spent 3 years, I said, positioning himself as the practical voice of reason, always comparing my plans to his real-world experience. Now that dynamic's been turned upside down. Everyone's going to need to adjust. I think he learned something important today," Evelyn said softly. "Not just about being wrong. About how dangerous it is to make assumptions with limited information." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not going to pretend that everything's fine now. Just because he apologized doesn't mean I suddenly trust him. That takes time to rebuild." Evelyn nodded, reaching over to take my hand. "I don't expect you to pretend anything. I just hope you can both move forward from this," Evelyn had said after that long, difficult conversation in our apartment. Over the next few weeks, Edmund made an effort. He called regularly, but not excessively, leaving voicemails about upcoming family gatherings, asking how things were going at Vianex Holdings. His tone had changed. It was respectful now, almost cautious, as if he were aware of the damage he'd done and was trying, in his own awkward way, to repair it. I returned his calls when I felt like it, and when I didn't feel like it, I didn't. Not to punish him, but because I was busy, really busy with the transition and integration work following the acquisition. And honestly, I didn't feel obligated to help him feel better about his guilt. He'd spent 3 years treating my work like it was an indulgence, not a pursuit. A few weeks of silence felt like an appropriate recalibration. The real test came 6 weeks later, at Christmas dinner. Edmund had asked if we'd be comfortable having the gathering at his house, given everything that had happened. Evelyn and I talked it over and agreed. We couldn't avoid family forever, and truthfully, I was curious. I wanted to see how he would carry himself, now that he no longer held the upper hand. He surprised me. He was gracious, but not obsequious. He asked thoughtful questions about the work I was doing at Vianex. When I answered, he didn't nod absent-mindedly or wait for a chance to change the subject. He listened, like it mattered. And when other family members brought up the acquisition, he didn't retreat into polite deflection. He joined the conversation. He expressed pride, not the performative kind, but the quiet, deliberate sort that felt earned. The most surprising moment came when his neighbor dropped by during dessert to hand-deliver a Christmas card. Edmund introduced me without hesitation. "This is my son-in-law, Luther," he said. "He just sold his analytics company to Vianex Holdings." Proud, clear, no qualifiers, no patronizing undertones. Not Evelyn's husband, who works in tech. Not he's doing something with data, I think. He said it like it meant something. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like it did to him. After dinner, while Evelyn helped her mother plate slices of pie in the dining room, Edmund and I ended up in the kitchen together. It was quiet. I leaned against the counter. He pulled 2 beers from the fridge, handed me one, and twisted the cap off his. Then he looked at me, really looked, and said, "I want you to know that I respect what you built. But more than that, I respect how you handled my skepticism. You could have made this whole situation much harder for Evelyn and for our family." I considered it. I said honestly, meeting his eyes. Edmund gave a wry smile. "I probably deserved worse than I got." "You definitely deserved worse than you got," I replied, letting the corners of my mouth lift just slightly. There wasn't malice in my voice, just truth, the kind we could both sit with now without flinching. The real vindication, though, didn't come from our reconciliatory talks or holiday dinners. It came 6 months later, when Vianex Holdings promoted me to Director of Small Business Analytics and announced that our platform had become their fastest-growing product line. The promotion came with a generous salary bump and a meaningful equity package, but what mattered most was the validation. It was everything I'd fought for since the earliest days of Skylum Analytics' acknowledgement that the work had value, that the vision had been sound, that I had not been delusional or naive. I had been right to believe in it, even when others hadn't. Edmund read about the promotion in the Austin Business Journal and called me immediately. His voice on the other end of the line was animated. "Luther, I just saw the news. Congratulations. Director already. That's huge." "Thanks," I said, leaning back in my chair and glancing at the framed Skylum logo I kept on my office shelf. "I've been telling everyone," he continued. "The guys at the Real Estate Association meeting, my neighbors, hell, even my accountant. I'm proud of what you've accomplished." It was a kind thing to say, and it felt sincere. Still, as I listened, I couldn't help thinking about how different this conversation would have sounded 3 years ago. Back then, Edmund wouldn't have known what the title meant, or why a promotion in a tech firm was worth celebrating. He wouldn't have understood why small business analytics was something to care about at all. His pride now felt genuine, but I recognized that it was still tied to external success, press coverage, titles, validation from sources he respected. And while I appreciated it, part of me still wished it hadn't taken a headline in a business journal for him to see the value in what I was doing. "I appreciate that," I told him. "Though I should mention the work itself hasn't changed all that much. I'm still building tools for small businesses. The difference is, now I have a team and more infrastructure behind me." "But now you're doing it as a director at a major company," Edmund said. "That has to feel different." "It feels good," I admitted. "But mostly because I get to keep solving problems I care about, not because of the title." There was a pause on his end, and then he said quietly, "I think I understand that now. I used to think job security and prestigious titles were the most important things. But watching what you built made me realize that finding meaningful work matters more than I thought." It was probably the closest Edmund would ever come to admitting that his entire framework for evaluating professional success had been limited. And to his credit, he was learning slowly, maybe, but earnestly, that there were different ways to build a valuable career. Not all of them came with suits and real estate portfolios. Some of them started with code and questions no one had answered yet. "Evelyn told me you're thinking about starting another company eventually," Edmund said. "Maybe in a few years," I replied, "after I finish my commitment to Vinex Holdings. There are still problems in the small business space that I think technology could solve, problems that aren't being looked at because they're not sexy enough for venture capital." "You'll have my support this time," Edmund said. "And my apologies again for not supporting you the first time." I nodded. I didn't need the apology anymore, but hearing it mattered. 2 years after the acquisition, Evelyn and I bought a house in central Austin, a modest but warm place with real wood floors, a backyard where we talked about planting citrus trees, and an actual home office where I could work when I wasn't needed at the Vinex Holdings headquarters. It wasn't extravagant, but it was comfortable in ways our old apartment had never been. It felt like a place built for stability and growth, like a foundation, not a temporary stop. Edmund and I had developed a relationship that finally resembled mutual respect more than family obligation. He had stopped offering career advice in the form of thinly veiled warnings and instead started asking genuine questions about the industry. I stopped expecting him to get it and instead started appreciating his willingness to ask, to listen, and most importantly, to learn. The dynamic at family gatherings shifted completely. I was no longer the guy with a computer hobby that people politely ignored. Instead, I found myself explaining emerging trends in data analytics to uncles and cousins who were actually curious. And when Edmund introduced me to his friends, he didn't say, "This is my son-in-law who works in tech." He said, "This is Luther, he's an expert in small business technology. Sold his company to Vinex Holdings." Brilliant stuff. His pride felt earned now, not obligatory. Evelyn was pregnant with our first child, and we had begun having long conversations about what kind of values we wanted to pass on, how to raise someone with conviction, curiosity, and kindness. I thought often about that fine line between skepticism and support, how easily one could bleed into the other if you weren't careful. How important it was to ask hard questions, but not to weaponize doubt. Edmund had taught me accidentally how important it was to believe in people, even when their path didn't make immediate sense. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in March, the kind where sunlight spills across the floor in long rectangles, and the house feels almost suspended in time. I was working in my home office debugging some code for a new internal tool when my phone rang. It was Edmund. "Hey, Luther," he said. "Any chance you're free for a coffee today? I could use your input on something tech-related." I paused for a moment, more surprised than anything. "Sure," I said. "What kind of input?" "It's this property management software I've been using," he said. "Something's off with the way it syncs tenant data across platforms. And I realized I've got a son-in-law who literally builds this kind of thing for a living." That last part came with a chuckle, but it didn't feel like a joke at my expense. It felt like an admission. A soft one. An overdue one. We met at the coffee shop just down the street from our house. He was already there when I arrived, a laptop open in front of him, his reading glasses halfway down his nose. The screen showed a cluttered dashboard full of tabs and half-loaded reports. "I should have asked for your help years ago," he said when I sat down across from him. I took a sip of my coffee before replying. "You weren't ready years ago," I said. "But you are now." He nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what I meant, and agreed. For the next hour, we talked shop. Database optimization. UI design. Error handling. Edmund took notes, asked follow-up questions, and listened with an attentiveness I hadn't seen from him before. Not just listening to be polite, but listening because he genuinely believed I had insight he didn't. And that's what made the moment feel significant. Not because he was finally coming to me for help, but because he wasn't doing it out of obligation or as a symbolic gesture. He needed help, and I was the best person he knew to give it. Driving home afterward, I thought about that Thanksgiving dinner 2 years earlier, about standing in his kitchen, a beer in my hand, while he explained with complete certainty why I was destined to fail. I could still hear his voice from that night, the quiet condescension in it, the way he believed he was protecting Evelyn from a future he couldn't see clearly. That memory didn't make me angry anymore. Not bitter. It was just a reminder of how far we'd come, of how far he had come. Because respect that is demanded is fragile, conditional. But respect that is earned over time, through friction, patience, and consistency, that kind settles in deep. That kind doesn't just change how someone sees you. It changes how they see the world. Some people needed time to recognize what they couldn't see immediately. And some victories were worth waiting for. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.